Librarian teaches immigrant woman English after hours, never knowing she'd nominate her for an award. The phrase hung in the air of the empty library like a whispered promise as Margaret Whitley gathered her things at closing time. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, matching the unsettled feeling in her chest. 30 years at Oakwood Public Library, and the budget cuts still stung like a fresh wound. Her reading programs would be the first to go. She glanced at the clock, 7:05 p.m., 5 minutes past closing. Margaret sighed, her cardigan pulled tight against the library's perpetual chill. The board meeting had gone exactly as she'd feared. Community engagement metrics? They'd said. Numbers, statistics, as if you could quantify the worth of a story or the value of a quiet place to belong. The sound of hesitant footsteps made Margaret look up from her desk. A woman stood in the doorway between the main reading room and the reference section, clutching a worn dictionary to her chest. Dark eyes, uncertain smile, a blue scarf wrapped around her head, ends trailing over a coat that was far too thin for an Oakwood autumn. "We're closed," Margaret said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. 30 years of routine made her protective of boundaries. "I am sorry." The woman's voice was soft, her accent thick. "Tomorrow I come back." She turned to leave, shoulders slumped in a way that made something twist in Margaret's chest. "Wait," Margaret surprised herself with the word. "What do you need help with?" The woman hesitated, turning back slowly as if expecting the offer to be withdrawn. "I need practice English. For job." Her fingers tightened around the dictionary. "Library is quiet. Good for learning." Margaret glanced at her watch, then at the stack of budget reports she'd been planning to review at home. The emptiness of her apartment flashed in her mind. The silent rooms, the pre-packaged dinner in the freezer, the book she'd been reading for weeks because she couldn't seem to focus on the words after work. "I have an hour," she said finally. "Just tonight." The woman's face transformed, smile spreading like sunrise. "Thank you. My name is Nadia Petrovich. Margaret Whitley." She gestured to a nearby table. "Shall we sit?" That first evening stretched into 2 hours, not one. Margaret found herself drawing diagrams on scratch paper, explaining the baffling inconsistencies of English pronunciation. Nadia was a quick study, her determination evident in the furrow between her brows as she repeated words until they sounded right. "I was teacher. In Ukraine," Nadia explained when Margaret commented on her methodical note-taking. "Mathematics. But here," she shrugged, a gesture that contained worlds of loss. "Why did you leave?" Margaret asked, then immediately shook her head. "I'm sorry. That's too personal." "No." Nadia's hand briefly touched Margaret's wrist, a feather-light connection that felt surprisingly warm. "Is good to practice with real questions." She took a breath. "War took my home. My husband, he died 3 years ago. My daughter and I, we come to America for new beginning." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Margaret nodded, suddenly conscious of how little she'd risked in her own life, how safely she'd moved through her years. "Same time tomorrow?" Margaret heard herself asking as they gathered their things. Nadia's smile returned, smaller but somehow more genuine. "If not trouble, no trouble at all." That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at her ceiling. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking about what the next day might bring instead of just enduring it. Winter settled over Oakwood like a heavy blanket. 3 evenings a week after the library closed, Margaret and Nadia would meet at the small table near the biography section. Their sessions developed a comfortable rhythm, vocabulary drills, reading practice, conversation. Margaret brought in newspaper articles and simple novels, delighting in Nadia's growing confidence. "Your daughter, Katerina, right? How is she adjusting?" Margaret asked one evening as they worked through a particularly challenging passage about American holidays. "Katie," Nadia corrected with a soft smile. "She wants American name now." "She is," she searched for the word. "Adapting? Better than me. Children, they bend like trees in wind, not break." Margaret nodded, noticing the way Nadia's fingers worried at the edge of her scarf, a nervous habit she'd observed over their weeks together. "And you? Are you bending or breaking?" Nadia's eyes widened slightly at the directness of the question. She was silent for so long that Margaret thought she wouldn't answer. "Some days I bend," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some days I feel like broken glass inside." She tapped her chest, just above her heart. "Sharp pieces that cut when I breathe." The raw honesty caught Margaret off guard. In 30 years at the library, she'd exchanged pleasantries with thousands of patrons, but few had ever revealed such vulnerability. She thought of her own careful life, the walls she'd built after Richard left 20 years ago, choosing a younger woman and a different future. "I understand," Margaret said simply, not offering platitudes or false comfort. "Tomorrow might be a bending day." Nadia's smile was soft. "Maybe so." She glanced at the clock and sighed. "I must go. Katie waits." As they packed up, Margaret hesitated, then pulled a book from her bag. "I brought this for you. It's poetry, Mary Oliver. The language is beautiful, but not too complex. I thought—" She faltered, suddenly unsure. Nadia took the book, running her fingers over the cover. "This is your book." "Not library book." "Yes, I'd like you to borrow it." "Thank you, Margaret." Nadia's eyes shone in the dim light. "In my country, we say books are bridges between souls." After Nadia left, Margaret sat alone in the silent library, surrounded by thousands of books and feeling, for the first time in decades, that one of those bridges might be forming in her own life. The December evening brought early darkness and the first real snowfall of the season. Margaret watched the flakes swirl past the library windows, wondering if Nadia would brave the weather for their session. The library had been quiet all day, most patrons choosing to stay home. At 7:15, just as Margaret had convinced herself Nadia wouldn't come, the front door opened with a gust of cold air. Nadia hurried in, snow dusting her blue scarf and the shoulders of her still too thin coat. "I am late." "I am sorry," she said, breathless from the cold. "Bus is slow in snow." "You shouldn't have come in this weather," Margaret scolded gently, already moving to make a cup of tea from her personal stash kept in the staff room. "Today is important." Nadia's eyes were bright with excitement. "I have interview tomorrow." "For job at elementary school?" "Not teaching mathematics, just, how do you say, helping teacher?" "A teacher's aide," Margaret supplied, returning with 2 steaming mugs. "That's wonderful, Nadia. They say my English must be good. I need to practice interview questions." Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the tea, whether from cold or nerves, Margaret couldn't tell. They spent the next hour role-playing interview scenarios. Margaret noticed how far Nadia had come. Her vocabulary had expanded, her grammar was more consistent, and though her accent remained, her confidence had grown tremendously. "You're ready," Margaret assured her as they finished. "More than ready." Nadia looked down at her hands, clasped tightly around her empty mug. "I am afraid," she admitted. "What if they laugh at my accent? What if I forget words?" "Then you take a breath and find them again." Margaret leaned forward, waiting until Nadia met her eyes. "You crossed an ocean to build a new life. You can certainly cross a classroom to share your gifts." Something in Nadia's expression shifted, a straightening of shoulders, a lifting of chin. "Yes," she said simply. "I can do this." As they prepared to leave, Margaret hesitated by the coat rack. Making a quick decision, she pulled her spare scarf from her bag, cashmere in a deep burgundy that she'd bought years ago but rarely worn. "Take this," she said, holding it out. "For luck." Nadia shook her head. "I cannot—" "Please, think of it as a talisman." Margaret gently draped it around Nadia's neck, tucking it into her coat. "Wear it to your interview." Outside, the snow was falling harder. Margaret insisted on driving Nadia home, learning for the first time that she lived in the small apartment complex near the railroad tracks, the most affordable housing in Oakwood, but also the least maintained. "Thank you for the ride," Nadia said as they pulled up. "And for—" She touched the scarf, words failing. "Let me know how it goes," Margaret said, surprised by how genuinely invested she felt in the outcome. Nadia nodded, then impulsively leaned over and kissed Margaret's cheek, a quick, warm press of lips that left Margaret speechless. Then she was gone, hurrying through the snow toward the dimly lit entrance. Driving home, Margaret touched her cheek where the kiss lingered like a memory of something she'd forgotten she needed. Nadia got the job. Their after-hours sessions continued, but with a new focus, helping Nadia navigate the cultural aspects of American education, preparing materials for the children she would assist, sharing stories of their respective teaching experiences. Margaret found herself looking forward to these evenings more than anything else in her week. The library board's concerns seemed distant now, even as the quarterly review loomed. Something had shifted in her approach to her work as well. She found herself reaching out to other immigrant families in the community, starting a multilingual story hour, creating a small but growing collection of books in various languages. "You seem different lately," observed Eleanor, her fellow librarian, one afternoon in February. More, I don't know. Present. Margaret shelved a book, considering the comment. Do I? I suppose I am. It's good, Eleanor said, smiling. For years I've watched you give everything to this place without taking anything back. Now it seems like you're finding something for yourself, too. That evening, when Nadia arrived, she brought a small container of homemade cookies. Katie and I baked them, she explained, setting them on the table. She asks about you, the library lady who helps her mother speak better English. Margaret felt an unexpected warmth at the thought of being discussed in Nadia's home, of being part of their story. How is Katie doing in school? Good. She has many friends now. Nadia's expression grew serious. But she has questions I cannot answer well. About American things. Sometimes I think she hesitated. What? More people in her life? People who understand this country. Nadia took a cookie, breaking it in half but not eating it. We have no family here. No friends from before. Margaret heard the unspoken invitation. Would you and Katie like to come to my house for dinner this weekend? The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Her house had not seen guests in years. Nadia's face lit up. Yes, we would like very much. That Saturday, Margaret spent the morning cleaning her small house, suddenly seeing it through new eyes. The faded furniture, the walls lined with bookshelves, the absence of personal photographs. She prepared a simple meal, wondering if she had made a mistake in extending the invitation. But when Nadia arrived with Katie, a solemn-eyed 9-year-old with her mother's dark hair and a smile that appeared like sudden sunshine, the awkwardness Margaret had feared never materialized. Katie gravitated immediately to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines with reverence. You have more books than the library, she said, her English nearly accent-free. Not quite, Margaret laughed, but I've been collecting a long time. Mama says books are the best friends because they never leave. Katie pulled out a volume of illustrated fairy tales. May I look at this one? Of course. Over dinner, Margaret watched the interplay between mother and daughter. The small corrections Nadia would make to Katie's table manners, the protective way her eyes followed her child's movements, the shared glances that contained entire conversations. Do you have children, Miss Margaret? Katie asked suddenly, fork paused halfway to her mouth. Katie, Nadia admonished gently. Personal questions are not polite. It's all right, Margaret assured her. No, Katie, I don't have children. Why not? Margaret considered the question, aware of Nadia's embarrassed expression. Sometimes life takes different paths than we expect, she said finally. I found my purpose in books and in helping people find the stories they need. Katie nodded, accepting this with a child's straightforward logic. Like you helped Mama find her words again. Yes, Margaret said softly, meeting Nadia's eyes across the table. Something like that. Later, after Katie had fallen asleep on the couch, book still open on her lap, Nadia and Margaret sat in the kitchen with cups of tea. I'm sorry for Katie's questions, Nadia said. She is curious about everything. She's wonderful, Margaret assured her. So direct and bright, like her father. Nadia's voice grew quiet. He would be proud of how she is growing. Tell me about him, Margaret said, realizing she knew very little about Nadia's past life. Nadia was silent for a moment, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Alexei was mathematics professor. We met at university. He was kind man, funny. He made me laugh even when things were difficult. Her eyes grew distant. When war came, he said we must stay to help others. Then one day he went to bring medicine to his mother and never came home. The simple tragedy of it caught in Margaret's throat. I'm so sorry. For a long time after, I could not speak. Not even to Katie. Nadia's eyes refocused on Margaret. Words were gone, like light switch turned off. She tapped her temple. Everything dark inside. And now? Margaret asked softly. Now sometimes there is light again. Nadia reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching Margaret's hand. You helped me find Switch. Margaret felt something shift inside her, like a door opening to a room she'd forgotten existed. You've brought light back to me too, she admitted. I didn't realize how routine my life had become. They sat in comfortable silence, the clock ticking softly, the sleeping child's gentle breathing a counterpoint to the winter wind outside the windows. Spring came to Oakwood, bringing with it the annual library board review. Margaret prepared her presentation meticulously, highlighting the increased community engagement, the new programs, the growing attendance at events. You've made remarkable progress this quarter, the board chairman acknowledged, reviewing the numbers. Particularly with our immigrant population. What changed? Margaret thought of Nadia, of their after-hours sessions that had evolved into a deep friendship, of the dinners they now shared regularly, of Katie's growing collection of borrowed books. "I remembered why libraries matter," she said simply. "They're not just repositories of books. They're places where lives intersect, where stories begin." After the meeting, flushed with success and the promise of restored funding, Margaret found Nadia waiting in the reference section, anxiety evident in her posture. "How did it go?" Nadia asked immediately. "Wonderfully," Margaret assured her. "Better than I could have hoped." Nadia's relief was palpable. "I was worried. You worked so hard." They walked together to the small cafe across from the library, a routine they'd established over the past months. As they settled at their usual table, Margaret noticed Nadia seemed distracted, her fingers nervously folding and refolding her napkin. "Is everything all right?" Margaret asked. "Is Katie okay?" "Katie is fine." Nadia took a deep breath. "Margaret, I need to tell you something important." The serious tone made Margaret's heart stutter. "What is it?" "I received a letter yesterday from Immigration office." Nadia's eyes were wide, still disbelieving. "My application for permanent residency is approved. Katie and I can stay in America forever if we choose." "Oh, Nadia." Margaret reached across the table, grasping her friend's hands. "That's wonderful news." "Yes, but..." Nadia hesitated. "There is more. My cousin in Chicago has offered me job in her business. Better pay. Apartment above store for Katie and me." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of meaning spreading outward. "You're leaving Oakwood," Margaret said, her voice flat with sudden understanding. "I have not decided," Nadia said quickly. "It is good opportunity, but..." She squeezed Margaret's hands. "We have life here now. Friends. You." Margaret felt the familiar walls trying to rebuild themselves around her heart, the self-protective instinct to withdraw before the pain of loss could fully form. But something stronger pushed back against that instinct. "When do you need to decide?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. 2 weeks. Nadia's eyes searched Margaret's face. "What would you do?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Margaret thought of her life before Nadia, the quiet routine, the sense of purpose limited to her role at the library, the evenings alone with books that increasingly failed to fill the silence. "I would consider what's best for Katie," she said carefully, "and for yourself." "And what about you?" Nadia pressed. "What is best for Margaret?" The directness of the question took her breath away. In all her adult life, few people had asked her that. Even she rarely asked it of herself. "I want you to be happy," she said finally. "Both of you. If Chicago offers that..." "That is not answer," Nadia said, a hint of her teacher's firmness entering her voice. "I ask what you want." Margaret looked down at their joined hands, Nadia's smaller ones within her own, warm and solid. "I want you to stay," she admitted quietly. "But I won't ask that of you. Some opportunities don't come twice." Nadia nodded slowly, accepting the answer even if it wasn't what she'd hoped to hear. "I will think carefully. For all of us." That night, Margaret stood at her living room window, watching the spring rain track patterns on the glass. She thought of the many changes her friendship with Nadia had brought, the weekend outings with Katie, the shared meals, the gradual awakening of parts of herself she'd thought long dormant. The possibility of losing this newfound richness made the rain seem colder, the night darker. But somewhere in that darkness, a realization was forming, that loving someone sometimes meant being brave enough to let them choose their own path, even when that path led away. The days slipped by, each one bringing Nadia closer to her decision. Margaret found herself cataloging small moments, the way Nadia's eyes crinkled when she laughed, Katie's excited voice as she described a book she'd read, the comfortable silences they shared over cups of tea. They didn't discuss Chicago again, though it hovered between them like an unfinished sentence. Instead, they filled their time together with ordinary beauty, a picnic by the lake, an afternoon helping Katie with a school project, evenings when their after-hours English sessions transformed into wide-ranging conversations about books, philosophy, and the strange journeys that had brought them both to this point in their lives. On the Sunday before Nadia's deadline, Margaret invited them to dinner. She prepared Nadia's favorite foods, set the table with care, and even bought a small gift for Katie, a journal with a lock and key, perfect for a 9-year-old's secrets. "This is special dinner," Nadia observed as they sat down. "Like celebration. Every dinner with you is special," Margaret replied, trying to keep her tone light. "How was school this week, Katie?" As Katie launched into a detailed account of her class's butterfly garden, Margaret watched Nadia, the attentive way she listened to her daughter, the elegant movement of her hands as she served the food, the quiet strength in her posture. Whether she stayed or left, Nadia had transformed Margaret's understanding of courage. After dinner, Katie went to the living room to read, leaving the adults to clear the table. They worked in companionable silence until Nadia spoke. "I have made decision," she said quietly, her back to Margaret as she rinsed a plate. Margaret's hands stilled on the dish towel. "I see." Nadia turned, her expression unreadable. "Tomorrow I will call my cousin. I will thank her for opportunity but say no." The words took a moment to penetrate. "You're staying in Oakwood?" "Yes." Nadia placed the plate carefully on the drying rack. "This is home now. For Katie. For me." Relief flooded through Margaret, so intense she had to lean against the counter. "Are you sure?" Chicago would offer more money, yes. Bigger apartment maybe, but not more of what matters. Nadia stepped closer, her eyes steady on Margaret's face. "Not you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Margaret felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. "I'm glad," she whispered. "I'm so glad." Nadia reached up, her hand warm against Margaret's cheek. "You should have told me what you wanted," she said gently. "It is same as what I want." In the living room, Katie turned a page, oblivious to the moment unfolding in the kitchen, the moment when Margaret Whitley, who had spent decades helping others find their stories, finally allowed herself to be part of one that was still being written. Summer bloomed across Oakwood, bringing with it a heat wave that drove record numbers of people into the air-conditioned sanctuary of the library. Margaret moved through her days with a new energy, her expanded programs thriving, her connections in the community deepening. Nadia's position at the elementary school had been made permanent, her natural gift for working with children earning her the respect of teachers and parents alike. Katie had completed 3rd grade with honors, her English vocabulary now often exceeding her mother's, though she worked diligently to maintain her Ukrainian as well. The three of them had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, weekday evenings often spent at Margaret's house, weekends exploring nearby towns or attending community events. They were, Margaret sometimes thought with wonder, becoming a family of a kind she had never imagined for herself. On a particularly sweltering Tuesday in July, Margaret was surprised to find the library director waiting in her office when she arrived at work. "Margaret?" He greeted her, uncharacteristically formal. "I've just received some interesting news I wanted to share with you personally." "Oh." She set down her bag, a flutter of anxiety rising. "Budget cuts again, perhaps?" "You've been nominated for the Caldwell Award for Community Service." He smiled at her evident shock. "It's quite prestigious, given annually to a librarian who demonstrates exceptional commitment to serving underrepresented populations." Margaret sat down heavily. "I don't understand. Who would nominate me?" "That's confidential during the selection process." He handed her an official-looking letter. "The ceremony is next month in Hartford. The award carries a $10,000 grant for the library and a personal stipend of $5,000. After he left, Margaret stared at the letter, trying to make sense of it. The Caldwell Award was indeed prestigious. She'd read about past recipients in library journals. But her work, while satisfying, had never seemed exceptional to her. That evening, when Nadia and Katie arrived for dinner, Margaret showed them the letter. "Someone nominated me for an award," she explained, still bemused. "A rather significant one." Katie examined the letter with interest while Nadia busied herself with setting the table, her movements slightly stiff. "You deserve award," Nadia said, not meeting Margaret's eyes. "You help many people." Something in her tone made Margaret look more closely. "Nadia, do you know something about this?" A faint blush colored Nadia's cheeks. "Maybe." "It was Mama," Katie announced, looking up from the letter. "She worked on it for weeks. I helped with the English." Margaret turned to Nadia, who was now definitely avoiding her gaze. "You nominated me? But how?" "The submission process must be complicated. I had help from your friend Eleanor," Nadia admitted. "She showed me where to find information about your programs, the numbers of people you helped, and I wrote about what you did for me, for others like me." "But why didn't you tell me?" Nadia finally met her eyes. "Because you would say no. You would say you are just doing your job, nothing special." Her voice grew stronger. "But it is special, Margaret. You make people feel seen, feel worthy. This should be recognized." Margaret felt something catch in her throat, the realization that Nadia had seen her more clearly, perhaps, than anyone ever had. Not just the efficient librarian or the helpful teacher, but the woman beneath who needed to believe her life had meaning beyond the shelving of books. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly unable to say more. Katie, with a child's intuitive understanding of emotional moments, slipped her hand into Margaret's. "Mama says you build bridges with words. Now everyone will know." That night, after Katie had gone to bed, Margaret and Nadia sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the lawn like earthbound stars. The heat of the day had finally broken, leaving behind a gentle warmth that invited contemplation. "I still can't believe you did that," Margaret said, their shoulders touching lightly as the swing moved. "Nominated me. I still can't believe you taught English to strange women after hours," Nadia countered, a smile in her voice. "Life is full of surprises." Margaret's hand found Nadia's in the darkness, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of practice. "When I was younger, I thought I knew exactly how my life would unfold," she confessed. "Career, marriage, children, retirement, a straight line from beginning to end. And now? Now I understand that the most beautiful journeys rarely follow straight lines." She squeezed Nadia's hand. "They circle back, take unexpected turns, and sometimes bring you to places you never knew you were looking for." Nadia leaned her head against Margaret's shoulder, her warmth a counterpoint to the night air. In Ukraine, we have saying, "God writes straight with crooked lines." Above them, stars emerged one by one, eternal witnesses to the small miracles that unfold when one person reaches across the darkness to another. In the quiet library of Margaret's heart, a new story was being written, one of second chances and unexpected joy, of language barriers overcome and new vocabularies discovered. A story that had begun on a cold October evening when a librarian, facing budget cuts and a diminished future, had looked up to find a woman with a dictionary and an uncertain smile standing in her doorway, never knowing that this simple moment would lead them both to discoveries no book could fully contain.